This interview is brought to you in association with Rabobank.
Hi there, welcome to another in our series of rural delivery interviews, where we talk with the leaders and innovators in our primary industries. This week, the Chief Executive of the Foundation for Arable Research, Nick Pyke, joins us to talk about FAR's recently released business strategy, which will see them through to 2017. Hi Nick, thanks for joining us.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. Nick, a new strategy for FAR, but who's it for? Can you describe a contemporary FAR stakeholder?
Yes, our strategy is for our growers at the end of the day, and we are an organisation which receives funds to invest on behalf of growers in research and extension to benefit them. So that's the cropping farmers of New Zealand growing a wide range of crops from wheat and barley through to a whole range of seed crops as well.
It's a pretty diverse bunch.
It is a very diverse bunch of growers. They are right throughout the country, and they're growing a whole range of crops sown at different times of the year and harvested predominantly through the summer period, but with maize right through until May, June.
What do they have in common, both in terms of threats and opportunities for their businesses?
Well, they have in common a whole range of things, I guess. The range of things include where they market the product, but also the other potential uses for their land. So it's a competitive land use at the moment with other land uses, but we have some real challenges to ensure that we can increase the productivity to ensure they remain competitive going forward.
And are they sustainable businesses at the current time? If you looked at your average arable farmer, if that was such a thing as possible, and you looked at the books, would you say, hey, look, this is looking okay?
I believe at the moment it's looking okay. I think there's significant challenges going forward, and certainly we have to look at the range of crops they're growing to ensure they're growing high-value crops that are going to give good returns to growers, and also try and increase their productivity to maximise yields to ensure they can get good returns from a financial perspective. We also have to look at what they're growing and how they're growing things to ensure that they're environmentally sustainable as well.
So what does the research mix that FAR invests in look like?
We invest in a range of things. So some of the investment is around trying to develop new innovative products that are potentially going to have greater value and where some of the intellectual property can be captured for New Zealand. We also invest in the range of products as far as feeding to livestock. So what are the sorts of things that the livestock industry is wanting, and how can we grow those crops well and produce the quality that the livestock industries are wanting, and that's both grain and a range of forage crops. We're also investing in how these crops are grown for feeding to people as well. But increasingly there's investment in how do we ensure that these crops are grown in a manner which is going to be environmentally sustainable. So understanding the nutrient balances and also understanding water use, more effective use of water, and how do we grow crops using some of the integrated pest management systems.
Okay, I'd like to dive into some of the specific parts of the strategy, but before I do that, a good strategy takes you from somewhere to somewhere else. Can you describe just briefly where we're at now and where the strategy aims to take this sector?
Yes, we operate in terms that are related to when we have a levy vote. So we had a levy vote which commenced the new levy order in 2012, and it takes us through to 2017 or 18. So what we've done is we've developed this strategy, which is a little bit different from the strategies we've had in place before. And this is a strategy to help the business go forward. We already have a research strategy which has 4 key components to it, and this will ensure that we put the other components around that to deliver on that research as well through to the end of our current levy term.
Okay, just starting with one of the things that's leapt out of the strategy the most for me is a goal that 95% of New Zealand's bread will be made with New Zealand wheat. Now, where are we at in terms of that goal currently, and why is that a goal that we should be aiming for?
That's a very good question, and I guess currently we're somewhere around the 20 to 25% of New Zealand bread is made with New Zealand wheat. Why have we got it as a strategy? There's a number of reasons. Firstly, that most of that wheat is produced in the South Island, so most of the bread in the South Island is made with New Zealand wheat, whereas the North Island is predominantly with imported wheat. And so the first part of it is to say, how could we grow more wheat in the North Island? And with the potential irrigation schemes coming on stream, particularly on the east coast of the North Island, that'll open up some land use opportunities to grow something different. So that's one of the opportunities there, is for them to grow milling wheat. The second and potentially major thing that's going on is the increased demand for wheat internationally. And that means that where we import wheat from may become more difficult to import from that source. And that's mostly Australia, and Australia has some very clear targets around exports to the Asian regions. And if they get anywhere near those exports, that would mean there'd be very little wheat left in their system to come into the New Zealand market. So it's also about being more self-sufficient.
Yeah, it's a food security issue.
That's correct.
Yeah. You've also got your eye on export markets, though, for wheat, and again, like Australia, looking to Asia. Any particular products? I notice you're looking at things like dairy replacements or dairy complements, snack foods, novelty grains, things like that?
Yes, we're looking to Asia for the very reason that other sectors in New Zealand are looking to Asia, huge population growth and increased wealth within that population. But we're being very focused around saying we shouldn't be supplying commodity-type products there. So it is around saying, is there some niches there? And one of those is potentially around biscuit wheats. We grow very high-quality biscuit wheat in New Zealand, and it's looking at supplying to a very small niche within the biscuit market. So saying, we're not going to supply flour to make general cookies, but we may supply top-end flour to make wafers or crackers or something like that.
You've also got domestic targets. Again, feed grains, to be as an essential component for dairy, poultry, equine, aquaculture. What will those products look like?
Well, the major change that's occurring in New Zealand is increased use of feeds into the dairy industry, whether they're forages or grains. And so what we expect and what we are seeing is happening is more localisation of those markets. So instead of grain being shipped out of a region such as Southland, more and more of that grain is being used within that region and is going directly from the grain grower to the dairy farmer, or in some cases the dairy farmer is the grower in their own right. And we're seeing increases in that for a number of reasons, some of it around milk production, some of it around environmental management within the dairy farms. And I think that's just going to increase.
It's interesting that you mentioned the number of dairy farmers who are becoming forage growers in their own right. It's surely a trend that's increasing, people integrating the supply chain. How's that changing, I guess, the makeup of FAR's stakeholders?
There's been a huge shift in the makeup of our stakeholders, so that we are seeing more and more dairy farmers as growers of crops, and whether that's on their dairy platform or quite often it's on a support farm. And they have different understanding to some of our existing seed growers, and the products they're growing are different. So it means that we're having to develop different systems in dealing with those farmers. The times of day they're available to talk about things, for example, is quite different. And we're also having to look at the value chain further, so understanding the quality requirements of those farmers as opposed to the traditional uses going into grain use for pigs or poultry.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of work to be done to basically to integrate these forage crops with the existing pastoral system in a way that's efficient for everybody.
Yes, I think that there's some huge shifts there where I think we're seeing some very significant shifts in the New Zealand farm system. So we're seeing a change from having a farm which was predominantly, say, a dairy farm or a sheep farm to more and more back to this mixed farming type system. The sorts of systems we see operating internationally, whereby a dairy farm will be growing some forages or grain feeds on the farm as well. And I think that's critical both for feeding the animals but also for best use of land, best soil management and best use of nutrients.
Now, of course, there is an inherent inefficiency in some cases of feeding these products to animals and then eating the animal or the animal's products. So how smart are we getting about understanding, hey, this is good for a feed, but this is a product that should be consumed directly by humans?
I think we're just starting down that chain in our thinking. From a research perspective, we can produce very high levels of protein, plant protein, from some of the crops that we can grow in New Zealand. And what we've got to think about is how can we integrate those proteins to complement the animal proteins that we're producing, whether they're milk or meat. And I think that there's some real opportunities around that to say we're not just an animal protein producer, we're a protein producer, and these are the best proteins. But we're at a very early stage in that, and that's part of our strategy going forward, is to say how can we better complement the range of proteins we produce in New Zealand with plant proteins.
It's worth remembering too that FAR also works alongside the vegetable industry. You've got some goals for them. You want to grow their overall productivity, I think around 20%, is that right?
Yes, that's right, and I think that, again, it comes back to this farm system and saying how can we best grow the farm within New Zealand, and it's a system. It's got a range of crops in it, so vegetables are one of the crops in that system. If we're going to grow the overall farm system, then we have to grow the vegetable component of that as well.
And potatoes are a bit of a star in that, particularly for process.
Yes, potatoes are a bit of a star, and we're now working much more closely with the Potatoes New Zealand on R&D aspects, and so hence a bit more of an increased focus on potatoes and trying to increase productivity and also increase, from their perspective, they're doing more around the exports and increasing that. So we've got to make sure that if they reach their targets, we've got the right R&D in place to ensure they can grow them.
Nick, we've talked a lot about growth. Just before we go, I want to touch on protection. Obviously, it's protection from without. Biosecurity is a big issue in the sector, but also protection from within in terms of pest resistance. Big parts of the strategy overall, the science strategy.
Yes, indeed. Biosecurity from without has two prongs to it, I guess. The first one is obviously we need to understand the external risks, so risks coming in over our country borders, and have things in place, strategies in place to manage those risks or to eradicate any incursions that we see. The second part of that is to say how do we prevent movements of things within the country that we don't want moving from one part of the country to another, and so having better on-farm biosecurity plans in place as well. Often it's hard to say what the risk is or accurately identify the risk, particularly in the sectors we're operating with. And so we have to have a strategy which is sufficiently robust but is also very nimble and flexible so that if there are changes we can respond quickly. And I guess we've seen that from a slightly different angle in the change in resistance of a major disease in wheat to a major group of fungicides in the last few days, and how are we going to change how we grow wheat to accommodate that change in resistance.
Look, Nick, we could keep talking. I'm going to have to wind it up there. Thanks very much for your time today. It's fascinating stuff. Best of luck.
Thank you.
This interview was brought to you in association with Rabobank.